She slipped into the base, not in a grand display of authority, but in simple black athletic shorts, a worn army green top, and a duffel bag slung casually over her shoulder. Yet, the officer at the administration desk barely glanced up before stating, "You can't wear that, not unless you're actively serving." He commanded her to either change or depart from the premises. As she turned to leave, her shirt rode up slightly, just enough for someone across the room to catch a glimpse of the tattoo etched on her upper back. A sudden stillness fell over them. That mark wasn't a trendy design from a vacation spot or a quirky symbol. It was a relic from a classified operation, a mission that never made headlines but profoundly altered the life of a high-ranking officer still in service. If you're curious about the meaning behind the tattoo and the dramatic turn of events that followed, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. The New Mexico sun had barely emerged above the horizon when Alara Vance guided her rugged pickup truck through the entrance of Fort Ridgeline. The air carried the distinct scent of dust and diesel, a familiar combination ingrained in every soldier's memory. Heat waves already danced above the asphalt, and the distant thrum of generators blended with the morning sounds of boots on concrete. A line of supply vehicles rumbled past the guardhouse, their engines adding to the ceaseless hum of military operations. She cut the engine and remained still for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The parking area stretched out before her, mostly empty save for a cluster of official vehicles near the main building. Through her windshield, she could see the training track where new recruits were already assembling, their voices carried on the dry breeze, like faint echoes of her own past. Some were stretching, others meticulously adjusting their footwear, charged with the nervous energy of soldiers anticipating a test. Alara checked her reflection in the side mirror, 46 years old, strands of silver woven into her brown hair, pulled back tightly. Fine lines creased the corners of her eyes, marks that hadn't been there when she'd first earned the 3 significant numbers on her back. Still, her posture remained straight, her hands unwavering. Alara stepped out deliberately, her movements possessing the purposeful quality refined by years of making every action count. She wore a faded Army physical training uniform, a gray shirt softened by countless launderings and black shorts that had seen better days. The fabric still bore the faint imprints of sharp creases from a previous life, when appearances were crucial for promotions and inspections. Her name tag was gone, leaving only subtle indentations where Vance had once been sewn in black thread. Her identification tags glinted faintly beneath her collar, hanging on a chain she hadn't removed in 23 years. To any observer, she seemed like just another former service member clinging to a past identity. Perhaps someone who yearned for the order, the purpose, the clear understanding of a mission and its unquestioning execution. However, Alara wasn't there to make a statement. She was there because Sergeant Major Thorne had contacted her 3 weeks prior. His voice, raspy with age and the toll of numerous desert deployments, had asked if she would set the pace for the female recruits during their annual assessment. "Need someone who understands what it means to push through when everything is falling apart," he'd said, his words carrying more weight than their literal meaning. Someone who's been there. Alara had agreed before he'd even finished his request. Not because she missed military life, though some days a deep ache in her chest affirmed she did, but because she remembered being 19 and afraid, running alongside women who had already proven their mettle, learning what true strength looked like when it wasn't for show. She checked her belongings one last time. Water bottle, car keys, the neatly folded authorization papers that should have simplified everything. Tucked carefully in an old t-shirt within her duffel bag was something else. A photograph from 2000. 5 soldiers smiling at the camera outside a forward operating base that no longer existed. 4 of those faces would remain forever young. The base's administration building loomed ahead, a stark structure of concrete and regulations. Alara pushed through the heavy glass doors into an abrupt chill that prickled her skin after the desert heat. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over pale walls adorned with safety posters and outdated announcements. A faded banner proudly declared, "Excellence in all we do," above a bulletin board cluttered with duty rosters and training schedules. The floor was the ubiquitous industrial linoleum found in every government building, polished to a dull sheen by decades of military boots. Behind the reception counter, a young specialist named Jenkins looked up from his computer screen, his expression shifting from boredom to mild confusion. He had the gentle demeanor of someone who had never experienced combat, never known the distinct burden that settles on your shoulders after being under fire and returning it. The nameplate on his desk read SBC Jenkins, K. in sharp, block letters. "Morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" Alara approached the counter with quiet assurance, her boots making soft sounds on the gleaming floor. She took out folded papers from her jacket pocket, each crease precise and intentional. "Alara Vance. I'm here for training support. Should be on your volunteer roster." Jenkins took the papers, scanning them with the casual attention indicative of too many routine inquiries. Behind him, two civilian employees sorted files, their conversation a low murmur punctuated by occasional laughter. Coffee brewed in a machine in the corner, filling the air with the burnt aroma of stale government coffee. Jenkins furrowed his brow at the screen. "I'm showing an E. Vance on the list, but—" He looked up at her physical training uniform, then back at the papers. "Ma'am, I don't believe that uniform is authorized unless you're currently assigned to this base." One of the staffers, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, glanced over. "Policy's pretty clear on that," she stated, not bothering to lower her voice. "Can't have people just wandering around in uniform pieces because they used to serve." Her colleague nodded. "You'd think folks would know better. Playing dress-up doesn't make you active duty again." Alara's expression remained unchanged. She stood there, unyielding as stone, while Jenkins clicked through more screens. The scent of burnt coffee wafted from the corner machine, mingling with the sterile smell of government-issue floor cleaner. "I'll need to check with the supervisor," Jenkins finally said, disappearing into a side office. Minutes passed. Through the windows, Alara could see the recruits beginning their warm-up stretches, their young bodies moving with the eager awkwardness of soldiers still discovering their own strength. A few glanced towards the administration building, curiosity flickering across their faces. When Jenkins returned, he brought company. Lieutenant Miller strode out of the office as if already resolving a problem that hadn't been fully explained to him. Early 30s, immaculate uniform, the kind of self-assurance untested by anything more challenging than training exercises. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, his uniform creases sharp enough to cut paper. He carried himself with the authority of his rank but lacked the weathered edges that came from wielding it in genuine combat. "Ms. Vance," he began, extending a hand with practiced courtesy, the kind taught in officer candidate school. "I understand there's some confusion about your participation today." Alara shook his hand once, firmly. Her grip was calloused, strong in a way that surprised him. "Sergeant First Class Alara Vance, retired. I'm cleared to support the evaluation." Miller glanced at the paperwork she'd submitted, his eyes methodically scanning the lines with the precision of someone who trusted regulations more than instinct. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the lieutenant bars on his collar, casting small shadows across his name tape. "This is more of a recommendation than an actual order," he said, his tone adopting that particular quality officers used when they wished to sound reasonable while remaining unyielding. "And Regulation AR 6701 is pretty specific about uniform wear. The PT uniform is for active duty personnel conducting official duties." He gestured to Jenkins, who held up a folded base t-shirt in a plastic bag, generic, civilian safe. The shirt was navy blue with Fort Ridgeline printed in block letters across the chest. "We'd be happy to have you out there in appropriate attire," Miller continued, his smile unwavering. "Otherwise, I'm afraid base policy requires." He let the sentence hang, his tone still polite but with an underlying firmness. Alara looked at the offered shirt, then back at Miller. She didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't defend her right to be there. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, filled only by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of recruits calling cadence outside. She simply nodded, bent to retrieve her duffel bag from where she'd placed it beside the counter, and turned towards the door. That's when it happened. As she leaned forward, her physical training shirt rode up slightly, exposing the skin between her shoulder blades. the fabric pulled taut across her back, revealing what lay beneath. Etched in stark black ink against sun-weathered skin were 3 numbers that made the air in the room suddenly feel thinner. 1375. The tattoo wasn't decorative. It wasn't a memorial or a motivational phrase in flowing script. They were just numbers, angular and precise, burned into skin like a brand. The ink had faded slightly over the years, but the lines remained sharp, uncompromising. Below the numbers, barely visible, was a smaller symbol, a stylized owl with its wings spread, perched above crossed swords. Jenkins didn't notice. He was already turning back to his computer, the morning's brief excitement over. Miller was adjusting his uniform, satisfied that policy had been upheld. But Staff Sergeant Delgado, walking past the hallway with a maintenance clipboard tucked under his arm, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto those numbers, and his face went pale. The clipboard slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the linoleum floor. Delgado had seen that tattoo before. In classified briefings he wasn't supposed to remember, on after-action reports that technically didn't exist. He'd been a young corporal then, assigned to intelligence analysis, tasked with deciphering heavily redacted documents. Most of the reports had been dull, routine, but some had kept him awake at night. Detachment 1375, Night Owl Group, the unit that secured the Northern Gate fallback route when everything went to chaos. The unit that rescued a NATO convoy by fighting alone for 43 minutes against impossible odds. The unit that was disbanded and purged from official records because their actions were too sensitive to acknowledge, too critical to celebrate, too perilous to officially recall. Delgado watched Alara walk towards the exit, her movements still calm, still deliberate. His throat felt parched. He should say something, should tell them who she truly was. Instead, he turned and walked swiftly towards the back offices, his clipboard forgotten, his mind racing towards a phone call he probably shouldn't make but absolutely had to. Outside, Alara found a spot on the bleachers near the track. She put down her duffel bag and watched the recruits go through their drills. The sun climbed higher, casting everything in shades of brass and shadow. The young soldiers moved with energy and purpose, their voices carried on the desert wind. She didn't sulk, didn't fume, just sat there, patient as the desert itself, watching the next generation prepare for challenges they couldn't yet imagine. A breeze caught her shirt, lifting it slightly. The tattoo remained visible, 3 numbers that told a story most people would never know. But Alara had learned long ago that recognition wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned, one quiet moment at a time. In the administration building, Delgado had found an empty office marked Communications, authorized personnel only, and locked the door behind him. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed a number he'd memorized but never used, a number from a briefing packet that had been burned after reading. The office smelled of stale coffee and old paper, with a single window that looked out over the motor pool where mechanics were already working under the climbing sun. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. No identification, no greeting, just command liaison. Delgado swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Delgado at Fort Ridgeline. I need to report a situation involving a possible classified personnel identification. A pause stretched longer than heartbeats. In the background, Delgado could hear the faint sound of keyboards clicking, the distant murmur of serious voices handling serious business. Go ahead, Sergeant. This line is secure. We have a volunteer here, retired female. She's got ink that. Delgado swallowed hard, thinking of the briefings, the redacted files, the whispered stories. Sir, she's got Detachment 1375 marked on her. Clear as day, with the owl insignia. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Delgado could almost hear gears turning, databases being accessed, decisions being weighed at levels far above his pay grade. Are you certain of the identification, Sergeant? Yes, sir, dead certain. I've seen those marks in classified materials. This isn't some wannabe with internet research. Understood. What's her current status with base personnel? They just asked her to leave, uniform violation. Some lieutenant thinks she's playing dress-up. Another pause, longer this time. Delgado heard papers shuffling, urgent whispers in the background. Sergeant Delgado, you will immediately inform your commanding officer that this individual is to be treated with full courtesy and given any assistance she requires. This comes from levels you don't need to know about. Do you understand? Yes, sir, absolutely. And Delgado, sir, this conversation never happened. But if anyone disrespects that woman again, they'll answer to people who don't wear name tapes. The line went dead with a finality that made Delgado's hands shake as he replaced the receiver. 10 minutes later, Major Sterling emerged from the administration building like a man on a mission. He was Fort Ridgeline's training officer, a man who'd seen enough combat to know the difference between paperwork warriors and the real thing. His uniform was crisp, but his boots were scuffed, and he carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He found Lieutenant Miller still at the front desk, sorting through volunteer paperwork with the satisfied air of a problem solver. Lieutenant, Sterling's voice cut through the ambient chatter. I understand we've had an issue with volunteer authorization. Miller straightened. Yes, sir, uniform regulation compliance. I handled it appropriately. Sterling placed a printed document on the counter. The header read, Service Verification, Sergeant First Class Alara Vance, Special Clearance for Training Support Activities. Valid through end of quarter. This was in your inbox since Tuesday, Sterling said quietly. Why wasn't it processed? Miller's face cycled through several shades of pale. Sir, there's a lot of paperwork. I must have. You must have failed to do your job properly. Sterling's voice remained level, but there was a frosty edge beneath it. Which means you questioned the authorization of a decorated veteran because you couldn't be bothered to read your email. Through the window, they could see Alara still sitting on the bleachers, her posture unchanged, her attention focused on the recruits. Sterling folded the document and tucked it into his pocket. I'm going to fix this, and Lieutenant. Yes, sir. Next time you think about playing uniformed police with someone you don't know, maybe ask yourself if you're qualified to make that judgment call. Sterling headed for the door, leaving Miller standing there with the slow, sickening realization that he'd just made the kind of mistake that follows you through your entire career. Alara saw him coming before he reached the bleachers. Colonel Hayes moved like water, smooth and inevitable. He was Fort Ridgeline's commanding officer, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room he entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through close-cropped hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of decisions made under fire. His uniform was crisp but lived in, adorned with ribbons that told stories of deployments to places that didn't make the news. When he stopped 6 feet from where she sat, his hands clasped behind his back, Alara didn't stand. She just looked up with those same steady eyes that had stared down enemy fire, that had watched good soldiers take their last breaths, that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. The recruits on the track had noticed the colonel's approach. Their conversations quieted, heads turning to watch this unexpected encounter. Even at a distance, they could sense something significant was about to happen. Sergeant Vance, Hayes said, his voice carrying just far enough for the administration building to hear. Each word was deliberate, weighted with authority on something deeper. That ink on your back. Where'd you earn it? Alara's posture didn't change. Only her voice moved, quiet but clear, cutting through the desert air like a blade. Northern Gate, April 2000. NATO fallback route. I was rear fire team. Hayes nodded once, slowly. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for a moment his eyes held the distant look of someone remembering friends who didn't come home. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice to something meant just for her, intimate as a confession. My brother was convoy security that day, Private First Class Owen Hayes. You pulled him out after the second IED, held the flank when everyone else fell back. Alara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A shadow crossed her face, memory surfacing like debris after an explosion. Didn't know who was in the lead truck. Didn't matter. Hayes studied her face for a moment, seeing something there that most people missed. Pain carefully controlled, grief that had been locked away because there had been no time to process it, no luxury of mourning, the weight of survivors who carried the names of the dead like stones in their pockets. He made it home because of you, Hayes said quietly. Lived another 16 years. Got married. Had kids. Died peacefully in his sleep last winter. Alara's breath hitched, just for an instant. Good, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's good. Then he did something that made the entire base take notice. He brought his hand up in a sharp, formal salute, right there on the edge of the track, in full view of every junior officer, every enlisted soldier, every recruit who happened to be looking their way. The base commander saluting a woman in a faded physical training uniform with no visible rank and dust on her sleeves. The gesture cut through the desert air like a blade. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even the recruits paused mid-stretch to stare. Hayes held the salute longer than regulation required, then dropped it with the same precision. If Sergeant Vance wants to wear that uniform, he said, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet, she wears it. If she wants to support our training, she supports it. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can come explain it to me personally. He turned toward the administration building, where Lieutenant Miller stood visible through the glass doors, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Policy, Hayes continued, serves the mission, not the other way around. Then back to Alara, his tone warming slightly. If you'll walk with me, Sergeant, I'd like to make this right. Alara rose, shouldering her duffel bag with practiced ease. Lead the way, sir. They walked back toward the administration building together, not as commander and subordinate, but as peers, as professionals, as soldiers who understood that respect isn't given. It's earned, one moment of integrity at a time. Inside the air-conditioned silence of Hayes's office, with the blinds drawn and the door closed, the conversation that followed was brief and quiet. Hayes pulled up files on his computer, scrolled through pages that most people didn't have clearance to see. Detachment 1375, he said without looking up. Night Owl Group, disbanded after the Northern Gate action. Classified records. Redacted reports. Heroes who officially never existed. Alara sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. That was the idea. You saved 17 NATO personnel that day. Held a defensive position for 43 minutes with no support, no resupply, no backup. Someone had to. Hayes finally looked at her. You were awarded a Bronze Star. It's sitting in a classified file that 3 people in the Pentagon have access to. Don't need a medal, Alara said quietly. The ones who mattered made it home. That's enough. Hayes printed a single sheet of paper, signed it with his own authorization code, and handed it across the desk. Updated clearance. You want to train with our people, you train with them. Whatever uniform you're comfortable wearing. Alara folded the paper once, precisely, and tucked it into her duffel bag. Appreciate it, sir. They walked out together, past the same staffers who'd made jokes about playing dress-up, past the same specialist who'd questioned her authorization. This time, nobody spoke. Some stood, others found urgent business elsewhere. On the track, the recruits had finished their warm-ups and were gathering for the main event. Young faces eager and nervous, looking toward their future with the kind of hope that hadn't been tested yet. Hayes addressed the training non-commissioned officer overseeing the formation. Sergeant Vance will be pacing today's run. She's cleared for whatever uniform components she's wearing. Effective immediately. The NCO nodded sharply. Yes, sir. Hayes's voice carried as he spoke to the assembled officers. New policy effective today. Prior service veterans supporting official training events are authorized appropriate uniform elements at command discretion. Questions about that discretion come to me. Lieutenant Miller, who had emerged from the administration building looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour, stepped forward. Sergeant Vance, I want to apologize. I didn't understand, Alara raised a hand gently, stopping him. You didn't ask. The recruits were watching now, sensing something important was happening even if they didn't understand exactly what. Whispers rippled through the formation. That's her. The one who... Did you see the colonel salute? Alara didn't wait for more ceremony. She dropped her duffel bag beside the bleachers, stretched once, and jogged out to the track with the kind of easy grace that comes from muscle memory. When the formation started moving, she wasn't just keeping pace. She was setting it. Her stride was smooth, controlled, efficient. The younger soldiers behind her found themselves working harder than expected just to stay close. Her breathing remained steady while theirs began to labor. Her posture stayed upright while theirs started to falter. By the second lap, nobody was questioning what she was doing there. By the third, they were trying to learn from it. Colonel Hayes remained at trackside, arms folded, watching the formation pass. His training NCO leaned over slightly. "Sir, think she's going to let them catch her?" Hayes's eyes followed Alara's steady rhythm, noting the way she seemed to glide while the recruits worked twice as hard for the same speed. "Only if she wants to," he said quietly. The run ended with Alara barely breathing hard, while half the formation bent over their knees, gasping in the desert heat. She'd paced them perfectly. Fast enough to challenge, controlled enough to build their confidence, professional to the core. As the recruits dispersed toward showers and lunch, Alara found herself sitting on the concrete steps outside the motor pool, watching the base settle into its midday rhythm. The sun was higher now, painting everything in shades of brass and amber. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, and somewhere in the distance a helicopter was running maintenance checks, its rotors creating a rhythmic thump that carried on the desert wind. A young private approached hesitantly, clutching a water bottle like a lifeline. Perhaps 19 years old, with the kind of earnest determination that reminded Alara of herself at that age. Her uniform was still crisp, her boots still held their shine, and her movements carried that careful precision of someone still learning how to be a soldier. "Ma'am," the girl began, her voice barely above a whisper. "If it's okay to ask, were you really with Night Owl?" Alara looked up, her expression gentle but guarded. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "I was." The private stepped closer, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. Her voice dropped even lower. "My cousin's National Guard served in Afghanistan." He said there were stories about that unit, about what happened at the Northern Gate, but he thought it was just classified rumors, ghost stories that officers told to scare new recruits. "It was classified," Alara replied, her voice carrying the weight of years spent keeping secrets. "Supposed to stay that way." The young soldier's eyes widened. "Did you really hold the position alone against a full company?" Alara was quiet for a moment, looking out across the base toward the distant mountains. The peaks shimmered in the heat, ancient and unchanging, indifferent to the small human dramas played out in their shadow. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady, like someone sharing a truth too heavy for one person to carry alone. "Not alone. Never alone. But the others." She paused, her throat working as if the words were difficult to swallow. "The others didn't make it back." The young soldier's face fell, her expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper: respect. Understanding that some questions shouldn't be asked, some stories shouldn't be pressed for. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Alara shook her head slightly, the gesture both dismissive and protective. "They didn't need pity. They needed time. When they ran out of time, they gave me mine. They gave everyone theirs." The private stood there, struggling with something bigger than she had words for. Her water bottle trembled slightly in her hands. Finally, she asked the question that had been building since she'd watched Alara pace the formation with effortless grace. "Why'd you come back? After everything? After what they took from you?" Alara stood slowly, brushing dust from her hands with movements that were precise, deliberate. She looked at the young soldier with something that wasn't quite a smile, but was warmer than stone, older than the desert around them. "Because someone's got to show you what quiet strength looks like. What it means to serve without needing recognition. What it costs to carry that weight and why it's worth carrying anyway." She paused, her eyes taking in the base around them, the young soldiers going about their duties, the flags snapping in the desert wind. "You're going to face things out there that the manuals don't cover. Times when the chain of command breaks down, when the mission goes sideways, when good people are depending on you to make impossible choices." Her voice remained steady, matter of fact. "When that happens, you'll remember that quiet strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one still standing when the noise stops. She walked to her truck, the same weathered pickup that had carried her through civilian life, now somehow different than it had been that morning. As she climbed in and started the engine, the recruits who'd run behind her were gathered near the barracks, still talking about the woman who'd made their best pace look effortless. Alara pulled away down the gravel road that wound behind the base, past the motor pool and the training fields and the endless expanse of desert beyond. In her rearview mirror, Fort Ridgeline grew smaller but somehow more solid, like something important had been settled there. Nobody stopped her, nobody questioned her right to be there. And the next time someone mentioned Detachment 1375, it wouldn't be in whispered rumors or classified files. It would be in the respectful silence of people who finally understood what real service looked like. Have you ever witnessed someone quietly maintain their resolve while others ridiculed them? Share this narrative with someone who comprehends the essence of quiet strength. Hit that subscribe button if you believe veterans deserve respect, not just on holidays, but every single day they walk among us.